Hi folks, Buckley here. We're going to go over a couple tips for how to write your Project 1 design report and make that process as painless as possible. So let's start by looking at a couple important documents that you should definitely read before you and your teammates sit down to compose your Project 1 design report. So let's start with the design report template. Okay, so this is a very detailed template on what we expect to see in your design report, right? All of the sections, okay, that we expect to see. You've written most of this content. I want to keep reminding you of that. So we're not asking you to write a whole lot of new content. We're basically asking you to merge a lot of the documents that you've already created together into a single cohesive design report, okay? So you should definitely look through this document, the design report template, read it, love it, okay? That's one of the important documents to definitely read as a team before you start writing your project report. The second is the grading rubric. So this is the Project 1 grading rubric, okay? Like all of the rubrics used in this class, we have a good, average, and poor performance, okay? And then it's each of the elements that we're looking for in your design report, right? With the points that are associated with each of those. Okay, so we're going to go through and we're going to look at a report. This is an actual submission from last year. Last year in the course, they had a different project. Okay, so this is an example that doesn't align exactly with what you guys are doing, but it's a good example report. This is a decent body of work. So let's go through and I'm going to walk you through how I would look at this report and what elements I'm looking for as a guide for you as you're writing. Okay, and I'll also mention what content you've already generated in the class that may be helpful for you. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the example design report, all right, and you guys are going to have access to this as well, along with the grading rubric that we're using in the course. So I'll give you the rubric that I have assigned to this. So we'll go through and grade it together. Okay, let's start. Obviously, they have a title page. Okay, they have a title to it, just doesn't read Project 1. I see all the teammates' names. I've taken the ID number off of this as well. Okay, we'd also want to see your team ID, please, on there. Next up, table of contents. Any reports that are this long, we expect to see a table of contents. Okay, this is a fairly decent table of contents. Only error I would see here is under appendices. I would expect to see actual titles for each of these appendices, okay? But this is fairly good. If you know how to use the templates in Microsoft Word to generate a table of contents, that's fantastic. It doesn't look like this team used that template, but you can go ahead and do that. All right, next up, I'm looking for an abstract. Okay, so this is an important element. This is a new piece that you're going to need to write. Okay, you have not written an abstract yet for your report. An abstract is basically summarizing what's going on in your project. So if you go to the general report, the design report template, it tells you a brief 250 words max summary of the project, motivation, scope, final design, design validation, and follow-up. You need to write this last, right? So you should be writing this now, actually this week, after you've completed all of the other phases of your project. You should be able to pull content directly from the main body. So if I'm looking at this team's abstract, I should see elements throughout the report. The goal of this project is to help college students maintain a cell phone charge. Great. After a survey and interview, so they told me the motivation. The final design used the scientific property of copper coils and the movements of magnets to generate power. Okay, so they're talking about induction. The power was 3 microwatts and successfully tested while attached to an arm, insignificant amount of power, and then the next step. So this is a very solid abstract. So if I'm going back to my rubric, I would actually grade this abstract. This abstract gets a 5 out of 5. It has all of the right characteristics of an abstract. Okay, all right. So let's look now at what we're expecting to see in the introduction, the background and significance stage. So if I go to my rubric here, what I want to see is paragraph 1 to 3 of the 4-paragraph essay, right? It states the broad problem, it uses UCR, it highlights a gap. Okay, that would be excellent. So I'm looking through here that there is evidence. There looks like there's evidence of a UCR in Appendix B. That's fantastic. They've benchmarked, so they've compared to previous projects or products that are on the market. Also great. Okay, they highlighted a limitation, which would be the gap paragraph. Okay, and then they actually used a 4-paragraph format, so this is going to be a motivation for their scope. Last year's project, we did not have a common scope across all of the teams. You guys all have a common scope. So this also is a very excellent. I would put this as a 10 out of 10 in terms of the characteristics of a good background and motivation. All right, let's look at the project scope statement. Your scope is given. Last year it was not. To design for a college-based consumer group a first-generation prototype of a portable body-mounted device that converts kinetic energy into electrical energy, capable of holding a charge on a portable smartphone. Okay, that's got all the characteristics of a good scope. Okay, and it flows from their background and significance. So again, a 5 out of 5. Okay, now I want to see wants and constraints. Wants and constraints were generated through thinking about common desires. The wants were prioritized using an end user survey. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm curious about what these guys did in the end user survey. Okay, so here's their end user survey here. And it looks like they definitely did ask about prioritizing the wants. So I'm seeing that very clearly from this. Okay, so let's look at what the wants are. And they've told me that they've used an end user survey to prioritize them. Functional, low cost, durable, adaptable, and aesthetics. Time and safety are their constraints. Those all seem reasonable. Portability and size. Okay, I wouldn't put that as a constraint. I might ding them a little bit on this, so I'm going to say a 4.7 or something like that, right? Just because that last one isn't exactly a constraint. All right, now their metrics table. This is very important. You can see in our metrics table, we've weighted this very heavily, right? So metrics are, a full is 12 points, right? So a lot of value to the metrics table. Metrics were prioritized from the wants. Target values came from general notes, UCR and benchmarks. Okay, so they're telling me in this column exactly where they're getting each of their target values. Functionality. Okay, so this looks good. I'm looking to make sure that their metrics are measurable. Their metrics pretty much are measurable, but they're not exactly concise, right? So stuff like this, right? Product should be able to charge an acceptable rate and hold sufficient charge for whatever device is connected. That's too much for a metric, right? So amount of charge that can be stored, right, or generated would be a good one. So 3 to 7 watts plus or minus 2 watts, I'm assuming. Okay, so I'm seeing some vagueness in this, but again, I'm kind of scanning here. Withstands a drop from standard drops at least a full year. Okay, that's not specific enough to test. I'm looking to make sure that the metrics align with the wants and constraints. Okay, and that they also have a target value that is measurable, right? Their target values are all very justified, but they're not all 100% measurable. So this was close. I would still put it in the good to high average, so I'm probably going to give this about a 10.5 on the metrics. All right, concept generation. All right, so these guys, they wrote, let's see, I want 3 unique and viable concepts. First concept is called an energy armband. They don't need this first paragraph, okay? So this is an unnecessary paragraph here. Note that everything up until this point right here, you guys have generated for your phase 1 draft, right? So you basically are reformatting your phase 1 draft. You're putting your justification for your target values in an appendix, and then you're incorporating any comments from your peer leaders. Okay, concept generation, that is activity A6, right? So you should be able to just pull from that. You wrote a paragraph, and then also created both a sketch, and we wanted to see an algodo model for each of the concepts. So what I'm checking here for concept generation is 3 unique and viable concepts, all right? And a 1-paragraph description of each. It should be clear. First concept is an energy armband, focuses on creating energy for active users. Jack charge smartphone, wiring coil along with magnets. The wire will, okay, wrap this device around your arm. Soul charger, okay, it's thermal, adaptable and easy to assemble, functionality. Okay, so these 2 are definitely unique from each other. Wheel worker, pedaling motion of the user. Okay, so these are each unique from each other, And let's take a look at the figures here. So note that this last year's project, they basically had to generate patent quality sketches. Okay, this isn't quite there. This is not done super cleanly. I would expect a slightly cleaner sketch, but I can see what's going on, right? I can see what's going on. Note that you guys will be including your Algodo models here instead. Okay, Soul Charger, again, I can see definitely what's happening here. This one is a little less clear, so I might ding them maybe 1 point on this. Okay, so it was good. 3 unique and viable concepts, but the concept sketches don't fully communicate the concepts. All right, shows our concept based off ordered wants and constraints, weighted matrix. Okay. The one thing that they're missing from this concept selection description is they didn't really tell me. They said the energy armband was the highest score, but what was driving that? What was driving that decision? Okay, so you should be able to pull directly from your activity A6. If you didn't score full points on that assignment, you want to go back and really look at your TA comments to make sure that that you're justifying why this came out to be the top choice. Okay, so I would place them actually in this one. All right, this here does not mention explain relative performance of the concepts. Okay, so this is definitely a 7 out of 8 on this one. And I'm going to go ahead and check the appendix too, just to make sure that they have enough information there about their weighted matrix. So this is appendix E. Okay, I'm going to come down. All right, and I can see that they've done their work here with this weighted matrix. All right, good. Okay, so let's look at the final design. All right, I'm going to go back to the main body. Note how I'm flipping back and forth between the appendix and the appendices and the main body of the text. Note that a lot of your readers are going to do this, right? So basically I'm looking at high-level information, and then if I'm curious about something, I'm digging into an appendix. That's really the value of writing a concise report and then having a lot of the detail in the appendix. Okay, so the final design, system level overview, okay, and some evidence of engineering decision-making and calculations. Okay, you guys have to compute a mechanical advantage. These guys did not. It was a different project. Okay, but I should see some evidence of a system level overview. They're showcasing their prototype here. Okay, also very important. Here's a schematic. So a more detailed schematic. I appreciate that. Okay, what I am not seeing here is much evidence of some engineering calculations. Okay, hopefully you guys will be able to do that. This was one of the shortcomings of last year's projects in general, was there was less emphasis on computation. Okay, so I'd like to see, I would ding them for missing some of their engineering calculations here. So I may give this about a 7.5 in that category. All right, let's look at design validation. All right, experiments. So design validation, so note that what we just went through with your detailed design, okay, you're going to want to pull in from activity 7 on that, okay, your phase 3, and obviously incorporate any comments that your TAs may have provided to you on that. Design validation is phase 4, which is activity 8. You likely will not have a fully graded activity 8 by the time that you submit your project 1 report. However, we've instructed your peer leaders to please do a spot check on all of your work and give you some early feedback. Okay, so if you have questions about your design validation or your activity 8 before you incorporate it into your report, go ahead and talk to your peer leaders. All right, so experiments on the early tested values, multimeters, able to measure volts and current. Okay, the device was being shaken on a person's arm at a rate of 3 hertz. Okay. Okay, so tests we ran showed that our design was definitely on the right track. It functions well, but power output is low. Okay, and they've made some recommendations for what comes next. They have given some form of a design validation table, which is important. I would expect some more detail from your guys' table, right? That was one of the components of Activity 8, was being very prescriptive about what we decided to see here. So design validation here, okay, they present a validation table. They have some decent summaries, right? I would not rate it as perfect, okay, because I prefer to see that in paragraph form. But they mostly had, I could see what they were doing in terms of design validation. All right, let's look at the last component, conclusions, okay? So this is another section that you'll be adding, just like you added the abstract, you're gonna add a conclusion section. Actually, before I get to that, note that with your testing, we expect to see a lot of the detail here in terms of test methodology. We expect to see that in an appendix now, okay? So slight difference from last year's report. All right, conclusions. Based off the original project scope, the prototype has failed to meet our original goal. All right, low power output. In order to reach our target audience, try to focus on portability. The only area the prototype meets is cost. Project is not worth abandoning because it is possible to meet the target values for our metrics. However, to improve the other metrics like power output and size, better materials would have to be purchased. A capacitor to stabilize the current, okay. Balance between cost and functionality. All right, so I can see what they're talking about here. So the take-home message from this is fairly clear, okay, and they have a fairly valid path forward. So I would give full points on that. All right, in terms of references here, okay, I expect to see a references section. I like to see that before the appendices, so this is just another minor formatting error. Okay, that's not a big point deduction, right? We're more focused on content than some of these minor formatting things, but let's see if I can find some references. References section. Okay, it's kind of mixed, right? So they've got references kind of all over the place. We'd like to see it in one section labeled references that comes right after the main report. All right, but let me take a look at what those references are and that they have enough of them and that they're coming from valid sources, right? Close to primary sources as possible. All right, these are benchmark references. Seeing some references here for metrics. Okay, these are mostly coming from popular science articles. Again, with the benchmarks. Okay, what they're using as references is a little bit unclear to me. All right, so they've got two types of decent references, right? References to benchmarks and technicals manuals associated with them. And then they also referenced some popular science articles. These are not primary references. Okay, so I would not give full credit on the references for this. But note that I'm not as concerned about the fact that it's not in the right place. I'm more concerned about the quality of them. So I would give about 4 points for these references. All right, I'm now going to start to examine the appendices. Okay, so what I'm looking for in appendices is that there's enough information that I would call these appendices standalone. All right, we prefer to see each appendix on a separate page. Again, that's a minor formatting issue. Target value justification, we used our end user survey to prioritize the user wants. Okay, they're not telling me how many people took the survey. These are fairly good notes about their fly-on-the-wall observations and their survey. I wouldn't call it completely standalone, though. If I just picked up this appendix and read it, I probably wouldn't know everything that's going on. All right, some of these are good. Benchmark various energy harvesting systems. This is solid. Okay, so it's kind of a mixed bag so far on these appendices being standalone. They have all the required appendices. Data for the metrics. Concept selection. Okay. So under appendices, I'd probably give this about a 9. About half of them were standalone. And they did have all of the recommended appendices. Okay, lastly, we're not heavily emphasizing this because again we're focused on content, but formatting and directions, they did a fairly good job on this. Okay, So there's a couple tiny little things in terms of where the sections go. So I wouldn't give it a completely perfect score, but I'd probably give it most of the points, 4.5 or 4.7. Okay, so at the end, this project winds up being around a 92 or a 93. Okay, which is still very, very solid. Okay, very, very solid as a grade in this course. All right, so that's just giving you a little example from last year from one of our teams, looking at their completed design report and how we're going to evaluate that using this rubric. All right, guys, that's all I have for you tonight. Hopefully you find this useful. Please don't be afraid to ask questions of your peer leader throughout the weekend as you continue to write this. Okay, it shouldn't be a huge amount of work. We're expecting somewhere around 2 hours if you work together as a team, pulling together a lot of the information you've already written. Please, please, please pay attention to these two documents. Again, the design report template and the rubric. We will also post this example report. I would again score it somewhere in the lower 90s there. Okay, still within the A range, but not 100% perfect. So you can use this, but please pay attention to the video and what improvements I'm suggesting here. All right, thank you very much.